In this edition of SmartBites, Girish Elchuri illuminates us on how design for testability is useful in building with quality. He is currently the founder and CEO of Smooth Innovative Solutions. You have been a very strong proponent of build with quality. Can you please explain?
So when we are developing a product, we all know that apart from the functional requirements, the quality requirements also are equally important. If the product works as per the functions and also as per the quality is important. And that must start from architecture. So you should have an architecture which is as per the current trends going with the microservices. And so it becomes much more easier to test it out, each service independently. And then we look at the design. So you need to have a robust design, preferably in a modular way. The reason, if you do a modular, again, it will simplify the process of testing it, because it's always easy to test a small portion than a big monotonous thing. So that is the second thing that you need to look at, having a design which is very modular so that you can do a plug and play much easily, including testing. The third thing that I would look at is in terms of what I call the zero trust programming. In the sense that when you are doing the development and you are doing the programming, you don't trust anything. Even if, for example, even if you are getting parameters from your own function, you don't trust them. You just verify them once again. So basically, the way that I do the programming is you do a lot of validations of the parameters, validation of the context, and a whole lot of other things. And when you know everything is right, then you go into the functionality. So that way, what happens is you are catching a lot of errors that are possible upfront, rather than in the logic and kind of having a runtime issue. That is the thing. After that, I would say that you have to kind of also make sure, put enough efforts to write the functional specs and design documents, because that is one aspect that people always ignore. Primarily what happens is that if you have a good functional specs and design documents, it becomes that much easy for the testing team or the quality team to design the test cases and all this. So I would say that you have to have a holistic approach to the quality, rather than a very narrow focus of testing it post the product is developed and then kind of suffer a lot.
Okay. Now help us understand, how does DFT or design for testability help in automation?
Okay. So when we talk about test automation, okay, I look at as three aspects. One is running the test cases. Second is invoking the functionality that you want to test. Third thing is asserting that the tests are either success or failure. Only if you can automate all these three functions, then we talk about test automation. Most of the times what happens is they talk about running the test cases as automation, but I would say it has to invoke the other two also. So with reference to running the test cases, I don't have to say, there are enough tools that kind of be used and invoked, right? But in case of invoking the functionality, that's where I would say that the developer can make a big difference. What they can do is, normally when you are developing a product, the product functionality is accessible only through the GUI. Okay. But what I would say is, they should also provide a backdoor to reach the functionality. And so what happens is, you can actually test the entire product functionality without having the GUI, okay, in a much more efficient way. So that is the way that the developers can help in terms of test automation. The third aspect of asserting whether the success or failure, again, a lot of times you don't know whether it has succeeded or failed, right? And it is difficult because sometimes a small state will change in the internally, and we don't know how to check it out. So the way that I always suggest is kind of have an extensive logs, what I call the structured logs. So normally what happens is when you are logging, you are basically putting debug messages, information messages, error messages. I also add another category called test messages. And in a structured log with test messages, it becomes that much easy for us to kind of go and check the log and test it out whether that particular test case has passed or failed. So I think this is the way that the developer can help the testability in test automation by facilitating the invoking and asserting the success or failure of the test case.
You mentioned about DFT enabling certain behaviors to test better via switches in code. Can you detail out how this helps?
Okay. So what the another practice that I do is to kind of the code during the testing times, the code behave differently in the sense that I'm not altering the functionality. Let me take it through some examples. Like for example, in a particular workflow, I add a mobile number, okay, or an email ID, and I validated them later, right? And so there may be certain functionality that would be possible only when you verify the mobile number and verify the email ID, which are the mundane things which you cannot do the test automation of. So what we do internally is when you are in the test mode, as soon as the mobile number is added or the email is added, we treat them as verified. We put that flag, right? So that you can do the further testing in a much more efficient manner. So one way, that's just an example of how you can make the product behave differently for the testability so that it will be a lot more efficient to kind of do that. That is the one thing. Second thing is, what happens is, in a workflow-based kind of a product, you do certain things, and for the third step of the workflow, you need some information that has kind of generated in the first and second steps, right? Now, what happens is normally this will be visible to the user on the GUI, but then in a GUI-less test automation, it becomes difficult. So what we do is, in the testing mode, we actually generate this data as a file. And then using that data that we have generated as a file, we kind of do the next steps in the workflow, right? So this is the another way that we kind of make the code behave differently in the testing. And the third thing is, there are in small percentage of cases, actually when I am running the test, right, for the subsequent steps, the code itself generates the test automation scripts.
Okay.
Okay, so what I do is instead of just outputting the data, I output a callable script call into the file. And at the end, I just execute that file. Okay. Now what happens is all these behaviors will happen only when I say I'm testing. So I have a flag there says I'm testing. And then what I do is additionally, I also make sure that these things are not run in the production mode. So there's some additional checks that we do. So that's where I see that again, a developer helping the testing people by kind of putting this additional code to facilitate the testing.
Excellent. You're talking a lot of things about DFT, build with quality, and so on. Now, what should I do to think on the lines of design for testability, and how do I adopt it?
Okay. So I always tell people that when you are developing a product, you must have the understanding of the big picture. And when I talk about the big picture, it's not only about the product, it's about the entire process of developing it. So that means you should put yourself into the shoes of every role. Like for example, there is a tech writer documenting the product. There is a quality engineer testing the product. There is a marketing person who is going to sell the product. So there are different roles that are involved in a product. And you must understand the function of each of these roles. And so what happens is when you are developing it, you are kind of facilitating all these roles, including quality. So you should be thinking yourself as a product manager, you should think yourself as a documentation person, you should think yourself as a quality engineer or the marketing person, and so you understand it. I mean, today, whatever I talked about is basically what I am practicing because I am trying to play those roles myself, right? So you think that you are the person who is going to understand each role, and so what happens is then you will be more uh, uh, putting forward your efforts to make sure that you are satisfying the requirements of each and every person, right? I think from that perspective, what you need to do is number one, you should understand the big picture from a product perspective, from a process perspective. You should have an attitude that I should make this successful and kind of facilitate for every role that they have in the product development and launch. And so that's how you can contribute, and that's what you need to do to make sure that you can kind of achieve quality. At the end of the day, you achieve quality not only kind of meeting the functional requirements, the customer requirements, the quality requirements, I would say even sales requirements. Is it not? Unless the product sells, it is not successful. It is not of good quality, right? So that's what I would say. If there is a perfectly working umbrella but opens the wrong way, right? It has passed the quality, but it is not going to be useful for the customers, right? There won't be any sales, right? So it's like the saying, no, the operation is successful, but the patient died. It should not be that case. It should be the case where at the end of the day, the product succeeds in the market. I think that's what you need to have, understanding a big picture. And that's what I think every person has to do in the organization.
But you also talked about the ability to put in hooks and put in some test switches, etc. Do you think that is also a mentality that you have to develop to be able to probe the system, facilitate the probing of the system, and therefore ideate on those too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The reason, if you go through my thought process, okay, when I am kind of putting these probes and other things, this is primarily is a thought process that I have developed when I am trying to do a scalability testing. If it is a few, an isolated test cases that I'm running manually, I can always go and look at the log and kind of manually kind of do these things. But when I'm doing the scalability testing, that's where I find the scale at which the things will happen. It's not possible to manually collect this data and write this one. And that's where I have put all these codes and all those things. So in my opinion, it's the attitude that matters. When you have an attitude that I want to help this guy, either it's a test engineer, documentation person, or the sales person, whoever it is, then what I will do is I will facilitate those things to happen in the product. Okay. What will the sales guy would want to do? Sales guy wants a demo system with live data, right? Now you should facilitate that in the product. You should facilitate to kind of create scenarios so that it can be shown to the customers. I mean, you cannot expect the sales guy to kind of do it once the product is developed without any of this help from you, right? I think that is what I would say is the attitude to fulfill the role of every single person associated with the product.